Welcome to this deep dive into one of the darkest and most unsettling tales in American history. Well, here it is. The morning rain tapped against the window of Margaret Chen's restoration studio in downtown Portland, Oregon, creating a rhythmic backdrop to her meticulous work. At 42 years old, Margaret had spent nearly 2 decades breathing life back into faded memories, her skilled hands transforming damaged photographs into pristine windows to the past. The studio occupied the second floor of a converted brick building on Northwest Everett Street, where the scent of chemical solutions mingled with old paper and the musty aroma of history itself. Her workspace was an organized chaos of light boxes, magnifying equipment, digital scanners, and carefully labeled bottles containing various restoration compounds. The walls displayed before and after examples of her finest work, each telling a silent story of preservation and rebirth. On this particular Wednesday in late October, Margaret received a package that would unravel everything she thought she knew about professional detachment. The elderly woman who had contacted her 3 weeks prior, Eleanor Hannon, had passed away before their scheduled appointment, but her grandson Thomas had followed through with his grandmother's final wish. Inside the carefully wrapped parcel, Margaret found a photograph so deteriorated that most restorers would have deemed it beyond salvation. The image, dating back to approximately 1923 based on the clothing styles and photographic technique, showed severe water damage, chemical staining, and physical tears that had been clumsily taped together decades ago. The photograph depicted a young woman standing before a grand Victorian house, her posture rigid in the formal style of early 20th century photography, yet something in her bearing suggested an inner strength that transcended the era's conventions. Margaret began her initial assessment with the systematic approach that had earned her reputation as one of the Pacific Northwest's most sought-after photo restoration specialists. She documented every imperfection, photographed the damage from multiple angles, and created a detailed restoration plan that would guide her work over the coming weeks. The accompanying letter from Thomas Hannon explained that this photograph was the only image his family possessed of his great-great-grandmother, Anna Hannon, who had arrived in America from Ireland in 1922. According to family legend, Anna had been a woman of remarkable determination who had built a successful boarding house business in Seattle during the challenging years following World War I, establishing the foundation for the family's modest prosperity. Thomas mentioned that his grandmother Eleanor had clutched this photograph during her final days, repeatedly insisting that someone needed to see Anna clearly, that the truth was in her eyes, though dementia had rendered her words increasingly cryptic and disconnected. The technical challenges presented by the photograph were substantial but not insurmountable. Margaret began with digital scanning at the highest possible resolution, capturing every detail before any physical intervention could potentially cause further damage. She worked under specialized lighting that revealed damage invisible to the naked eye, noting areas where the emulsion had separated from the paper backing, regions where mold had begun its destructive work, and sections where the image had faded to near invisibility. The water damage had created brown stains that obscured crucial details, while someone's well-intentioned but harmful attempt at repair with ordinary tape had caused chemical reactions that further degraded the image. Margaret estimated the restoration would require 40 to 50 hours of concentrated work, spread across several weeks to allow for proper drying times between different treatment stages. As she worked through the initial cleaning phase, removing surface dirt and the remnants of the old tape, Margaret found herself increasingly drawn to the woman in the photograph. Anna Hannon's face, gradually emerging from decades of damage, possessed a compelling quality that transcended the formal stiffness typical of the era. Her features suggested Irish ancestry, with high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and thick dark hair pulled back in the Gibson girl style popular in the early 1920s. She wore a simple but well-made dress that spoke of respectable working-class prosperity, not the elaborate garments of the wealthy but certainly not the threadbare clothing of the destitute. The Victorian house behind her appeared substantial, likely the boarding house mentioned in the family history, its painted siding and ornate trim work suggesting pride of ownership despite the photograph's overall deterioration. Margaret's process involved multiple stages, each requiring different techniques and materials. She used specialized solutions to neutralize the chemical damage, working with cotton swabs and brushes so fine they contained only a few bristles. The water stains required particularly delicate treatment, as aggressive cleaning could remove what little remained of the original image. She employed a technique called humidification, placing the photograph in a controlled environment where moisture would relax the damaged fibers without adding to the existing water damage. This allowed her to carefully flatten creases and smooth areas where the paper had buckled and warped. Between sessions, she stored the photograph in an archival-quality enclosure, protecting it from light, humidity fluctuations, and atmospheric pollutants that could cause further degradation. 3 days into the restoration, as Margaret worked on stabilizing the photograph's most damaged quadrant, she experienced the first moment of unease that would eventually consume her professional and personal life. Using a powerful magnifying lens to examine a particularly degraded section near Anna's face, she noticed something that seemed inconsistent with the rest of the image. The damage in this specific area appeared deliberate rather than accidental, as if someone had carefully applied a chemical agent to obscure a particular detail. Margaret had seen intentional damage before, usually family members attempting to remove an unwanted person from a photograph after a falling out or divorce, but this seemed different. The damage was too precise, too carefully controlled to be the work of someone acting in emotional distress. It suggested premeditation, a conscious decision to hide something specific while preserving the overall image. Intrigued and professionally challenged, Margaret adjusted her restoration approach to focus on this mysterious area of damage. She employed advanced digital reconstruction techniques, using multiple light wavelengths to penetrate layers of degradation invisible to standard photography. Infrared imaging revealed details hidden beneath water stains, while ultraviolet light exposed chemical alterations made to the photograph decades after its creation. Slowly, painstakingly, Margaret began to uncover what someone had worked so hard to conceal. The area in question was located just to the left of Anna's face, initially appearing to be empty space or perhaps part of the house's architectural detail. However, as Margaret's digital reconstruction progressed, faint outlines began to emerge, suggesting that something or someone had been standing beside Anna Hannon when the photograph was taken. The discovery transformed Margaret's professional interest into something approaching obsession. She extended her working hours, arriving at the studio before dawn and remaining long after other businesses in the building had closed for the evening. Her husband James, a high school mathematics teacher, began leaving prepared dinners in the studio's small refrigerator, knowing that reminding Margaret to eat was often the only way to ensure she did so during intense restoration projects. Their teenage daughter Sophie, a junior at Lincoln High School, grew accustomed to her mother's distracted presence at family dinners, recognizing the particular intensity that indicated a project had captured Margaret's complete attention. Margaret's obsessive focus was not unusual. She had always possessed the ability to lose herself completely in challenging restoration work, but something about the Hannon photograph felt different, more personally significant than any previous project. As October progressed toward November, Margaret successfully restored most of the photograph to a condition that would have delighted any client. Anna Hannon's face emerged with remarkable clarity, revealing details that had been hidden for nearly a century. Her expression, captured by some long-dead photographer in 1923 Seattle, displayed a complexity that transcended the era's formal photographic conventions. There was determination in the set of her jaw, intelligence in her direct gaze toward the camera, but also something else, something Margaret initially struggled to identify. As she studied the restored image during her lunch break on a gray Friday afternoon, Margaret finally recognized what she saw in Anna's expression: fear masked by defiance, vulnerability hidden beneath a carefully constructed facade of strength. This woman had been terrified of something or someone, yet determined not to show that fear to whoever stood behind the camera. The intentionally damaged area beside Anna proved more resistant to restoration. Margaret tried multiple approaches, combining traditional conservation techniques with cutting-edge digital reconstruction, but the obscured section remained stubbornly unclear. She could discern that a figure had stood there, someone approximately the same height as Anna based on perspective analysis, but identifying details remained frustratingly elusive. The figure appeared to be wearing light-colored clothing, possibly a dress, and seemed to be standing very close to Anna, their shoulders nearly touching in a proximity that suggested familiarity or intimacy. Margaret found herself wondering about the relationship between Anna and this hidden figure, speculating about why someone had gone to such lengths to remove this person from the family's visual history. The breakthrough came during a late evening session in mid-November, when Margaret was preparing to close the studio and head home to the family Thanksgiving planning that James had been patiently managing without her input. She was performing a final examination of her restoration work, checking for any remaining imperfections that might need addressing, when she noticed something she had previously overlooked. In the very corner of the photograph, at the extreme left edge where the image had been least damaged, a portion of a hand remained visible. The hand was small, delicate, and positioned in a way that suggested it had been resting on or near the obscured figure's shoulder. More significantly, on one finger of that partial hand, Margaret could clearly see a ring, its distinctive setting catching the light in a way that the primitive photography of the era had captured with unexpected clarity. Margaret photographed the ring detail with her high-resolution camera, then enhanced and enlarged the image on her computer. The ring appeared to be substantial, possibly gold, with what looked like a dark stone at its center, surrounded by smaller stones or decorative metalwork. It was clearly an expensive piece, not the simple band one would expect from a working-class boarding house proprietor or her associates. More intriguingly, as Margaret studied the enhanced image, she realized the ring bore an engraved design on the band, though the photograph's resolution and the limitations of 1920s photography made reading the engraving impossible. However, the very presence of such an engraving suggested the ring held personal significance, possibly a family heirloom or a gift marking an important occasion. Margaret found herself wondering whether this ring might still exist somewhere in the Hannon family's possession, whether Thomas or another family member might recognize it if asked. The ethical implications of Margaret's discovery weighed heavily on her as she drove home through Portland's rain-slicked streets that evening. As a restoration specialist, her job was to repair and preserve photographs, not to investigate family mysteries or uncover hidden histories. Yet the deliberately obscured figure and the mysterious ring suggested a story someone had wanted forgotten, a history that Eleanor Hannon might have been trying to reveal in her final, confused days. Margaret thought about Thomas's description of his grandmother's last words, her insistence that someone needed to see Anna clearly, that the truth was in her eyes. Had Eleanor known about the hidden figure? Had she been the one to damage the photograph? Or had she discovered someone else's concealment and spent her final days trying to undo that erasure? Margaret spent Thanksgiving weekend distracted from her family's festivities, her mind returning repeatedly to Anna Hannon and the mysterious figure someone had worked so hard to hide. She researched Seattle's history in the early 1920s, learning about the social conditions, immigration patterns, and cultural norms of the era. She discovered that Seattle in the years following World War I had been a city of dramatic contrasts, with rapid economic growth alongside significant social tension. The Irish community, to which Anna belonged, had been well established but not always warmly welcomed, facing discrimination that was less severe than that experienced by Asian immigrants but present nonetheless. Women of Anna's generation, having gained the right to vote only 3 years before the photograph was taken, were navigating an era of changing social expectations, caught between traditional roles and new possibilities. On the Monday following Thanksgiving, Margaret made a decision that would fundamentally alter the course of her investigation and her life. She contacted Thomas Hannon, explaining that the restoration had revealed some interesting details that might benefit from family context. She carefully avoided mentioning the obscured figure or the ring, not wanting to alarm him or make promises about information she could not yet deliver. Thomas proved eager to help, inviting Margaret to his home in the Alameda neighborhood, where he had been sorting through his grandmother Eleanor's effects and had discovered several boxes of family documents and photographs that might provide useful context. He mentioned that his grandmother had been something of a family historian, maintaining detailed records and correspondence that documented the Hannon family's American experience from Anna's arrival through the present day. Margaret visited Thomas the following Saturday, finding his craftsman-style home filled with the organized chaos of an estate in transition. Thomas, a retired Boeing engineer in his early 70s, had transformed his dining room into a makeshift archive, with boxes of photographs, letters, and documents arranged chronologically across the table and surrounding floor. He greeted Margaret with genuine warmth, grateful that someone was taking such interest in his family's history, particularly in preserving his great-great-grandmother's memory. Thomas explained that Anna had died in 1968, long before his birth, and that most of what he knew about her came from his grandmother Eleanor's stories, which had grown increasingly fragmentary and confused as dementia claimed her final years. He admitted that he had always suspected there were family secrets, unspoken histories that Eleanor had hinted at but never fully revealed, particularly regarding Anna's early years in America. The collection Thomas had assembled proved remarkable in its scope and preservation. Anna Hannon had apparently been an avid correspondent, maintaining regular communication with family members in Ireland and friends throughout the Pacific Northwest. Eleanor had carefully preserved these letters, along with business records from Anna's boarding house, newspaper clippings, church bulletins, and various ephemera that documented daily life in early 20th century Seattle. Margaret spent hours carefully examining the materials, looking for any reference to the mysterious figure or the distinctive ring. She found numerous letters mentioning Anna's boarding house business, her involvement in the local Irish community, and her reputation as a fair but firm landlady who maintained high standards while charging reasonable rates. However, references to Anna's personal life remained frustratingly vague, with no mention of close friends, romantic interests, or anyone who might have stood beside her for that 1923 photograph. This afternoon faded toward evening. Thomas prepared coffee while Margaret examined a box of photographs from the 1920s and 30s. Most showed Anna at various ages, documenting her life from young proprietor to middle-aged businesswoman. In several images, she appeared with other women, presumably boarding house residents or members of her church community, but none of these women seemed to match the size or position of the hidden figure from the original photograph. Margaret was about to close the box, discouraged by the lack of relevant information, when she noticed a small envelope that had slipped between the box's bottom and side. The envelope, yellowed and fragile, bore no address or postmark, suggesting it had never been mailed. Inside, Margaret found 3 items that would redirect her entire investigation: a small pressed flower, now faded to brown, a ticket stub from a Seattle theater dated May 19, 23, and most significantly, a small photograph that showed Anna Hannon standing with another woman in what appeared to be a garden setting. The second woman in the garden photograph was striking, with features that suggested mixed European ancestry, possibly Italian or Greek. She was slightly taller than Anna, with dark hair worn in a short, fashionable bob and an expression of unguarded joy that contrasted sharply with the formal stiffness typical of the era's photography. The 2 women stood close together, their shoulders touching in a familiarity that echoed the positioning Margaret had partially reconstructed in the damaged photograph. More tellingly, on the taller woman's right hand, clearly visible as she gestured toward something beyond the photograph's frame, was a ring that appeared identical to the one Margaret had discovered in the corner of the original image. The ring's distinctive setting was unmistakable, and Margaret felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension as she realized she had found a connection to the deliberately obscured figure. Thomas leaned over Margaret's shoulder to examine the garden photograph, clearly surprised by its existence. He had never seen this image during his previous sorting of his grandmother's effects, he insisted, and had no idea who the woman standing with Anna might be. Margaret carefully removed the photograph from its envelope, checking for any writing or identification on the back. In faded pencil, barely legible, someone had written 2 words, Anna and Rose. The name Rose had been partially erased, as if someone had begun to remove it then stopped, leaving the letters ghostly but still discernible. Below this, in different handwriting that appeared more recent, possibly from the 1960s or 70s based on the pen's ink characteristics, someone had written, "Some truths die with those who live them." Margaret recognized the handwriting from various documents in Eleanor's collection. This edition had been made by Thomas's grandmother, apparently her cryptic commentary on a history she knew but would not explicitly reveal. The discovery of the garden photograph transformed Margaret's restoration project into a historical investigation that consumed her December. She created high-resolution scans of all the materials Thomas had shared, returning the originals to his care while promising to report any significant discoveries. Margaret's approach to historical research mirrored her restoration methodology: systematic, thorough, and patient. She began by attempting to identify Rose through Seattle city directories, census records, and immigration documents from the early 1920s. The search proved immediately challenging, as Rose was an extremely common name in that era, and without a surname, Margaret faced the prospect of examining thousands of potential matches in King County alone. Margaret expanded her investigation to include newspaper archives, reasoning that if Rose had been significant enough in Anna's life to warrant deliberate erasure from family history, she might appear in contemporary public records. She spent long hours at the downtown Portland Library, accessing their extensive digital newspaper collection, searching for any mention of Anna Hannon in Seattle publications from 1922 through 1930. The Seattle newspapers of that era documented a vibrant, rapidly growing city, with regular coverage of social events, business developments, and community news that included mentions of successful Irish businesswomen like Anna. Margaret found several references to Anna's boarding house, including a small feature in the Seattle Times from October 1924 that praised her establishment as exemplifying the city's finest rooming house standards. However, none of these articles mentioned a companion named Rose or provided clues about Anna's personal relationships beyond her role as a boarding house proprietor. The investigation took a significant turn in mid-December when Margaret visited the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle, which maintained extensive archives documenting the city's social history. A reference librarian named Patricia, intrigued by Margaret's research questions, suggested examining the records of Seattle's women's organizations from the 1920s. The period following women's suffrage, Patricia explained, had seen explosive growth in women's clubs, professional associations, and social organizations, many of which maintained detailed membership records and documentation of their activities. If Anna had been an active businesswoman with community connections, she likely belonged to several such organizations, and if Rose had been important in Anna's life, she might appear in those organizational records. Patricia's suggestion proved remarkably fruitful. In the records of the Seattle Business Women's Association, Margaret found Anna Hannon listed as a charter member from 1922, with regular attendance noted at monthly meetings through 1928, after which her participation became sporadic before ceasing entirely in 1931. More significantly, in a group photograph from the association's first anniversary celebration in December 1923, Margaret identified both Anna and a woman who matched the physical description from the garden photograph. The woman stood in the back row, her height placing her head above most of the other assembled members, her features bearing the same striking Mediterranean quality Margaret had noted in the earlier image. The photograph's caption listed all participants alphabetically by surname, and Margaret's heart raced as she located the entry she had been seeking: Rose Martinelli, proprietor of Martinelli's Dress Shop, Pine Street. With Rose's full name finally established, Margaret's research accelerated dramatically. Rose Martinelli appeared in numerous Seattle records from the 1920s, painting a picture of a successful, ambitious immigrant who had arrived in America from Italy in 1919, survived the post-war economic difficulties, and established a thriving business catering to Seattle's growing population of working women who needed practical, affordable clothing. City directories showed Martinelli's Dress Shop operating at the same Pine Street address from 1921 through 1929, with Rose listed as both owner and resident at the shop's upstairs apartment. The 1930 census recorded Rose as a 28-year-old single woman, born in Italy, naturalized citizen, with no family members in her household, operating a retail business with 2 employees. Margaret created a timeline mapping the documentary evidence of Rose's presence in Seattle against Anna's known movements and activities. The pattern that emerged suggested a close, sustained relationship between the 2 women from at least 1922 through 1928. They appeared together in multiple organizational photographs. Their names appeared on the same committee rosters for various charitable and business activities, and business records suggested they frequently recommended each other's services to customers and associates. In April 1924, Anna had served as a sponsor when Rose applied for American citizenship, a role that required attesting to the applicant's good character and community standing. This sponsorship indicated a level of trust and mutual respect that went beyond casual business acquaintance, as serving as a citizenship sponsor carried significant legal and social responsibility. The relationship between Anna and Rose appeared to have existed within a broader network of unmarried professional women who supported each other's business endeavors and social activities. Margaret discovered references to regular social gatherings, theatrical outings, and summer excursions that included both women among a group of 8 to 12 participants, all single businesswomen who seemed to form a tight-knit community within Seattle's larger Irish and Italian immigrant populations. The social dynamics of this group fascinated Margaret, who recognized in their documented activities the precursor to modern professional women's networks, though operating within the more restrictive social conventions of the 1920s. These women had created a support system that allowed them to maintain independence and business success while navigating a society that generally expected women to prioritize marriage and family over professional achievement. However, in 1928, something significant had changed. Margaret noticed that Anna's organizational participation declined sharply after June of that year, with her last documented attendance at a Seattle Businesswomen's Association meeting occurring in August. Rose's participation similarly ended around the same period, though for her the cessation was more dramatic. In November 1928, she had abruptly sold her dress shop to one of her employees and disappeared from Seattle City records entirely. Margaret searched extensively but could find no subsequent traces of Rose Martinelli in Seattle or anywhere else in Washington state. The woman had simply vanished from the documentary record, as if she had never existed beyond those 6 years of documented Seattle residence. The timeline Margaret constructed revealed another crucial detail. The boarding house photograph, the one showing Anna alone before the Victorian house with the deliberately obscured companion, had been taken in May 1923, according to the date on the photographer's studio mark on the photograph's reverse side, which Margaret had only recently examined closely enough to decipher. This placed the image within the period of documented friendship between Anna and Rose, during the time when the garden photograph showing them together had also been taken. The theater ticket stub Margaret had found in Eleanor's envelope showed a date of May 19, 23, less than 2 weeks after the boarding house photograph. Margaret hypothesized that the obscured figure beside Anna had been Rose, that the ring visible in the photograph's corner had belonged to Rose, and that someone, at some point after the photograph was taken, had deliberately worked to remove Rose from the Hannon family's visual history. Margaret's investigation into what might have caused Rose's disappearance and erasure from Anna's documented life led her into Seattle's darker social history. The late 1920s had been a period of increasing moral conservatism despite the era's popular image as a time of social liberation. Seattle, like many American cities, experienced periodic moral reform campaigns, often led by religious and civic organizations concerned about perceived threats to traditional family values. Margaret found newspaper coverage of several such campaigns between 1926 and 1930, including efforts to close down speakeasies, regulate dance halls, and investigate boarding houses suspected of harboring immoral activities. The definition of immorality in this context was broad, encompassing everything from illegal alcohol sales to unconventional living arrangements to relationships that violated societal norms regarding gender, race, or class. In December 1928, the Seattle Star had published a series of articles on what it termed the city's boarding house problem, suggesting that some establishments harbored criminal activities or moral irregularities that threatened neighborhood stability. While none of the articles specifically mentioned Anna's boarding house, Margaret noticed that the series had concluded with promises of further investigations that would root out establishments where proprietors failed to maintain proper standards. These articles appeared in November and December 1928, the exact period when Rose had sold her business and disappeared from Seattle records. Margaret found herself wondering whether there was a connection, whether some threatened or actual investigation had prompted Rose's sudden departure and the subsequent erasure from Anna's photographic record. The ring that Rose wore in both the garden photograph and the original boarding house image became a focal point of Margaret's investigation. She consulted with a jewelry historian at Portland's Oregon Historical Society, providing detailed images of the ring as captured in the photographs. The historian identified it as likely being an Irish claddagh ring, a traditional design featuring 2 hands holding a crowned heart, symbolizing love, loyalty, and friendship. However, The ring in the photographs appeared to be an unusually elaborate version of the traditional design, with what looked like gemstones incorporated into the setting, suggesting it was a custom piece rather than a standard commercial item. Most significantly, the historian noted that claddagh rings traditionally carried romantic significance when worn in certain ways, with the direction the heart faced indicating whether the wearer was in a relationship or available. This information prompted Margaret to re-examine the photographs with specific attention to how Rose wore the ring. In both images, the ring appeared on Rose's right hand with the heart facing inward toward her body, which according to Irish tradition indicated that her heart was taken, that she was in a committed relationship. Margaret's understanding of the implications deepened as she researched claddagh ring traditions and discovered that in early 20th century Irish American communities, these rings often served as unofficial engagement or commitment tokens, particularly among immigrants maintaining cultural traditions in their new homeland. The fact that Rose, an Italian immigrant, wore such an elaborate Irish ring suggested she had acquired it from someone with significant Irish cultural connections, someone for whom the ring's traditional symbolism held meaning. Anna Hannon was the most obvious candidate. Margaret struggled with the implications of her research findings. The evidence suggested a relationship between Anna and Rose that had extended beyond friendship or business association, though the exact nature of that relationship remained ambiguous given the era's different social conventions and the coded language often used to describe non-normative relationships. The deliberate erasure of Rose from the family photograph, Eleanor's cryptic final comments about truth being in Anna's eyes, and Rose's sudden disappearance all pointed toward a history that the Hannon family had wanted forgotten. Yet Margaret recognized the danger of projecting modern interpretations onto historical evidence, of reading contemporary understandings into relationships that might have been understood quite differently by those who lived them. The ambiguity frustrated her professionally even as it made her more certain that Eleanor had wanted someone to pursue exactly this line of inquiry as Christmas approached. Margaret found herself increasingly emotionally invested in Anna and Rose's story in ways that transcended professional interest. She shared her research findings with her husband James during a rare evening when they both had time to talk without interruptions. James listened carefully to Margaret's reconstruction of events, then asked the question she had been avoiding. What did she intend to do with this information once the photograph restoration was complete? Margaret had no clear answer. Her responsibility was to restore and return the photograph to Thomas Hannon, not to conduct historical investigations or reveal family secrets that had been deliberately concealed. Yet she felt an obligation to Eleanor, who had spent her final days trying to direct someone toward this truth, and to Anna and Rose, whose story had been silenced by circumstances Margaret could only partially reconstruct. The ethical dilemma intensified when Margaret successfully completed the digital reconstruction of the obscured figure in the boarding house photograph. Using advanced software and combining multiple imaging techniques, she created a version of the photograph that showed both women as they had originally appeared before someone had chemically damaged the image. The reconstructed photograph revealed Rose standing beside Anna. Both women posed formally but standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Rose's hand, which Margaret had previously seen only as a fragment at the photograph's edge, rested gently on Anna's shoulder in a gesture that could be read as friendly support or something more intimate depending on the viewer's interpretation. Rose wore the distinctive claddagh ring, its elaborate setting clearly visible even in the relatively primitive photography of the era. Both women looked directly at the camera, their expressions serious but not unhappy, projecting an image of mutual strength and determination. Margaret printed two versions of the restored photograph, one showing only Anna as the damaged original had been intended to appear, and one with Rose digitally reconstructed to show the image as it had originally been created. She packaged both versions carefully, including detailed documentation of her restoration process, her discovery of the deliberate damage, and her reconstruction methodology. However, she deliberately excluded her research into Rose's identity and the evidence suggesting the nature of Anna and Rose's relationship, reasoning that this information extended beyond her professional mandate. She arranged to deliver the restored photographs to Thomas Hannon in early January, giving herself the holiday period to decide how much, if anything, to share about her historical findings. The decision was effectively made for her on the afternoon of January 2nd, when Thomas called Margaret's studio in a state of considerable agitation. He had been continuing his own examination of his grandmother Eleanor's effects and had discovered something that fundamentally changed his understanding of his family's history. He asked Margaret to come to his house as soon as possible, saying that what he had found might explain his grandmother's final obsession with the photograph and her insistence that the truth was in Anna's eyes. Margaret agreed immediately, her curiosity overcoming any reservations about becoming further involved in the Hannon family's private history. She gathered her research materials and the two versions of the restored photograph, sensing that the revelation Thomas had discovered would require the context her investigation had uncovered. Thomas greeted Margaret at his door with an intensity that immediately signaled the significance of his discovery. He led her not to the dining room where they had previously worked but to his study, a smaller space lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered with papers. On the desk lay a metal lockbox, its lid open to reveal stacks of letters bound with faded ribbon. Thomas explained that he had found the lockbox while cleaning out a storage space in his basement, hidden inside a larger trunk of his grandmother Eleanor's belongings that he had previously assumed contained only old linens and household items. The lockbox had been locked, but Thomas had discovered the key taped to the trunk's interior lid, suggesting Eleanor had wanted the contents found eventually but had taken measures to ensure casual discovery remained unlikely. The letters, approximately 60 in total, spanned from May 1923 through August 1928, covering almost exactly the period when Margaret's research had documented Anna and Rose's close association. The letters were addressed to Anna Hannon at her Seattle boarding house, all sent from various locations within Washington State, Oregon, and once from as far as San Francisco. The return address on every envelope read simply Rose, with no surname, though the Seattle addresses matched the location of Martinelli's dress shop during the relevant periods. Thomas had read several of the letters, he admitted, enough to understand their general nature and their explosive implications for his understanding of his family's history. He wanted Margaret present because she had already uncovered part of this story, and because he needed someone with historical expertise to help him contextualize what these letters revealed about an era so different from his own experience. Margaret approached the letters with the careful reverence she would apply to any fragile historical document. The paper quality varied, suggesting Rose had written on whatever was available, from fine stationery to notebook paper to the back of business forms from her dress shop. The ink had faded but remained legible, Rose's handwriting flowing and confident, marked by occasional misspellings that suggested English was not her first language. Margaret began reading chronologically, starting with the earliest letter dated May 22, 1923, just days after the date on the theater ticket stub she had found in Eleanor's envelope. The letter opened with casual discussion of the theater performance they had apparently attended together, Rose noting how much she had enjoyed the comedy despite finding some of the jokes difficult to understand because of language nuances she still struggled with after 4 years in America. The tone of the early letters reflected warm friendship, with Rose writing about her daily business concerns, sharing observations about Seattle's changing social landscape, and asking Anna's advice on various matters ranging from business decisions to dealings with difficult customers. However, as Margaret progressed through the chronological sequence, the letters' emotional intensity increased noticeably. By late 1923, Rose was expressing sentiments that moved beyond conventional friendship, writing about how Anna's presence had transformed her experience of Seattle, how thinking about their times together sustained her through difficult days, and how she treasured every moment they could share away from the scrutiny of their respective businesses and communities. These letters walked a careful line, expressing deep emotion while rarely using explicit language that would definitively indicate romantic involvement, a pattern Margaret recognized from her research on how non-normative relationships were often documented in eras when such relationships faced severe social and legal consequences. A letter from February 1924, written shortly before Anna sponsored Rose's citizenship application, provided particularly revealing insight into their relationship and the challenges they faced navigating early 20th century social conventions. Rose wrote about her fears that the citizenship interview process might include questions about her personal life, her concern that officials might view her unmarried status and close friendship with Anna as suspicious or morally questionable. She expressed gratitude for Anna's willingness to serve as sponsor despite these potential complications, noting that Anna's reputation in the Irish community and her status as a successful businesswoman provided protection that Rose, as an Italian immigrant still establishing herself, lacked. Rose's letter acknowledged the risk Anna was taking by publicly associating herself with Rose's citizenship application, suggesting both women understood that their relationship existed within a social context that viewed it as potentially problematic. The correspondence from 1925 and 26 documented the peak period of Anna and Rose's relationship, when they had apparently been able to spend significant time together while maintaining the outward appearance of a conventional friendship between two professional women. Rose's letters from this period brimmed with plans for their future, including discussions about potentially combining their businesses in some way that would allow them to work more closely together. She wrote about a potential property she had seen that could accommodate both a boarding house and a dress shop, about her vision of creating an establishment specifically catering to professional women who needed both lodging and appropriate work attire. Rose's letters revealed herself to be an ambitious businesswoman with a sophisticated understanding of market opportunities, seeing ways to serve Seattle's growing population of employed women that existing businesses overlooked. However, interwoven with the business planning were passages that left little doubt about the romantic nature of Anna and Rose's relationship, though Rose carefully avoided language explicit enough to constitute documentary evidence that could be used against them if the letters were ever discovered by unsympathetic parties. She wrote about longing for Anna's presence, about counting the days until they could next spend time alone together, about her frustration with the necessary performance of maintaining separate public identities when what she wanted was to build a life openly with Anna. One particularly poignant letter from July 1925 described a summer excursion to Mount Rainier that Anna and Rose had taken with their group of friends, during which they had managed to slip away briefly to a secluded spot where they could speak freely without fear of being overheard or misunderstood. Rose's description of that moment, the freedom of being able to express their feelings without constraint or coded language, revealed the constant emotional burden both women carried in their daily lives. The letters from 1927 marked a tonal shift, as increasing anxiety began to overshadow the earlier optimism and affection. Rose wrote about growing concern regarding social attitudes in Seattle, mentioning several incidents where unmarried women living together or maintaining close friendships had faced public scrutiny or censure. She referenced a case that had apparently received newspaper coverage, though she did not provide enough detail for Margaret to identify the specific incident, in which two women running a boarding house together had been investigated by civic authorities based on anonymous complaints about their moral character. The investigation had apparently found no legal wrongdoing but had destroyed the women's business through the associated scandal, forcing them to close their establishment and relocate to different cities. Rose worried that similar attention might eventually focus on her and Anna, particularly as their continued unmarried status and close association became increasingly conspicuous in their respective communities. By early 1928, Rose's anxiety had intensified into active fear. Her letters referenced increasing pressure from her Italian community to marry, including a cousin who had arrived from New York attempting to arrange a match with a widower seeking a wife to help raise his 3 children. Rose wrote about the emotional exhaustion of constantly deflecting marriage proposals and family pressure while maintaining the fiction that she simply had not yet met the right man, that she was too focused on her business to consider marriage seriously. She described feeling trapped between the impossibility of her relationship with Anna becoming publicly acknowledged and the increasingly unsustainable nature of their private arrangement. Rose's letters revealed her awareness that their situation could not continue indefinitely, that eventually something would have to change even though she could see no acceptable resolution. The May 1928 letter that Margaret found particularly significant made explicit reference to the boarding house photograph that had initiated this entire investigation. Rose wrote that she had seen a photographer near Anna's boarding house during her last visit and had learned that Anna had commissioned a formal photograph of herself and the establishment to use for business promotion. Rose asked whether Anna intended to include her in the photograph, acknowledging that doing so would constitute a public declaration of their association that might attract unwanted attention, but admitting that she desperately wanted some lasting documentation of their relationship beyond private photographs that had to be carefully hidden. Rose's letter revealed her understanding that any such image would need to be carefully composed and ambiguous enough to be read as innocent friendship by unsympathetic observers, while still serving as a secret testament to their bond. The following letter, dated June 1928, referenced the completed photograph with a mixture of joy and melancholy. Rose thanked Anna for including her in the image despite the risks, describing how meaningful it was to stand beside Anna before the house that represented everything Anna had built, knowing that somewhere in Seattle a photographer's negative existed, preserving that moment of acknowledged connection. However, Rose also wrote about her growing conviction that their situation had become untenable, that the constant strain of maintaining their relationship in secret while facing escalating social pressure was destroying the joy that had originally sustained them. She wrote about loving Anna too much to continue risking Anna's reputation and business, about believing that perhaps separation would be less painful than the slow erosion of their bond under constant external pressure. The letters from July and August 1928 documented the painful unraveling of Anna and Rose's relationship, though neither woman seemed able to make the decisive break both apparently believed necessary. Rose wrote about investigating business opportunities in Portland and San Francisco, about considering whether relocating might provide enough distance to reduce the social pressure while still allowing occasional contact. Anna apparently resisted these suggestions, based on Rose's responses defending the practical necessity of separation while acknowledging her own reluctance to leave Seattle and the life they had built together. The correspondence revealed two women caught between their feelings for each other and their inability to envision a sustainable future within the social constraints of late 1920s America. The final letter in the collection, dated August 26, 1928, was shorter than the others and carried a tone of resigned finality. Rose wrote that she had received word of a significant business opportunity in San Francisco, a chance to manage a larger dress shop with potential partnership possibilities that would substantially advance her career. More significantly, she had learned through community contacts that Seattle civic authorities were planning renewed investigations into boarding houses and other establishments suspected of moral irregularities, prompted by a coalition of religious and civic reform organizations. Rose wrote that she could not risk Anna being caught in any investigation that might examine their friendship too closely, that Anna's business and reputation were too important to be jeopardized by association with suspicions about Rose's character or their relationship. She announced her decision to accept the San Francisco position, to leave Seattle within 2 weeks, and to end their correspondence to protect Anna from any potential fallout. The letter's final paragraph left Margaret struggling to maintain professional detachment. Rose wrote that she would always cherish their years together, that Anna had given her the only period of her life when she had felt fully seen and understood despite the constant necessity of hiding. She acknowledged that their relationship could never be what either of them truly wanted, that the world they lived in offered no space for the life they had imagined building together. Rose asked Anna to destroy all her letters after reading this final message, to eliminate any documentary evidence that might someday be used to harm Anna's reputation or business. She expressed hope that Anna would eventually find happiness, perhaps even conventional marriage if that proved possible despite everything they had shared. The letter ended simply, "I will love you always, though we can never speak of that love again." Thomas watched Margaret's face as she finished reading, his own expression reflecting the complex emotions her research had evoked. He explained that he had struggled intensely with what these letters meant for his understanding of his family's history, for his memory of the great-great-grandmother he had never met but had always been taught to honor as a model of immigrant success and conventional respectability. The letters revealed a hidden history that complicated that narrative, exposing secrets his grandmother Eleanor had apparently known but never explicitly revealed. Thomas wondered whether Eleanor's decision to preserve rather than destroy these letters indicated her belief that eventually the time would come when this truth could be told, when Anna and Rose's story might be understood with more compassion than their own era had permitted. Margaret shared her research findings with Thomas, showing him the evidence she had compiled documenting Anna and Rose's relationship, the business associations, the social networks, and the eventual erasure of Rose from the family's photographic record. She presented both versions of the restored photograph, the one showing only Anna, as the damaged original had been intended to appear, and the digitally reconstructed version showing both women as they had originally been photographed together. Thomas studied both images for several minutes, his expression thoughtful and sad. He asked Margaret what she thought had happened after Rose left Seattle, whether either woman had found the happiness Rose had hoped for in her final letter. Margaret had researched this question and could provide partial answers. Rose Martinelli appeared in San Francisco city records from 1929 through 1935, listed as manager and later part owner of a successful dress shop on Market Street. However, in 1936, she had abruptly sold her business share and disappeared from California records entirely. Margaret had found a death certificate indicating that Rose Martinelli, immigrant from Italy, age 43, had died in Los Angeles in 1947 of heart failure, with no immediate family listed and burial in an unmarked pauper's grave. The circumstances suggested Rose had experienced financial difficulties in her final years, though the specific reasons remained unclear from available documentation. Anna Hannon's later life was better documented through the materials Thomas possessed. She had continued operating her boarding house through the 1930s, maintaining her reputation as a skilled and fair proprietor despite the economic challenges of the Depression era. In 1938, at age 46, Anna had married William Hannon, a widowed Irish immigrant 20 years her senior who worked as a warehouse supervisor at the Seattle docks. Their marriage appeared to have been one of companionate respect rather than passion, based on the correspondence Eleanor had preserved, with William providing Anna with the social legitimacy of married status while Anna managed both her business and their modest household. They had no children, though William had 3 adult children from his first marriage who remained distant from Anna throughout her life. William had died in 1952, and Anna had lived another 16 years as a widow, finally dying in 1968 at age 76. Eleanor, Thomas's grandmother, had been William's granddaughter from his first marriage, making her Anna's step-granddaughter without any blood relation. Despite this distant connection, Eleanor and Anna had apparently developed a close relationship during Anna's widowhood, with Eleanor frequently visiting the elderly woman in the small house Anna had purchased after selling her boarding house in the late 1950s. Thomas now understood that these visits had likely been when Anna had shared her history with Eleanor, including the truth about Rose and their relationship, trusting Eleanor with secrets she had guarded for nearly 4 decades. Eleanor had preserved Anna's letters and the undamaged photographs, hiding them carefully but ensuring they survived for a future time when such stories might be told without destroying reputations or families. The question Thomas now faced was what to do with this information. He felt an obligation to preserve his family's complete history, including the parts that had been deliberately hidden, but worried about the implications for other living family members who had grown up with conventional narratives about Anna's life. He asked Margaret's opinion about how to handle the restored photograph, whether to share the reconstructed version showing both women or to present only the version showing Anna alone, maintaining the erasure that someone, probably Anna herself, had carefully constructed decades earlier. Margaret recognized that she was being asked to make an ethical judgment that extended far beyond her professional expertise as a photograph restorer, yet she understood that her months of research had given her an investment in Anna and Rose's story that imposed its own obligations. Margaret spent several days considering her response to Thomas's question before arranging another meeting to discuss the restored photograph and the broader implications of what they had discovered. She had consulted with James, who as a teacher understood the complexities of presenting difficult historical truths in ways that honored the people involved while acknowledging contemporary social contexts. James reminded Margaret that her primary obligation was to her client, that Thomas had commissioned a photograph restoration, not a family history investigation, but he also acknowledged that the research Margaret had conducted had been necessary to properly restore the photograph and understand why it had been damaged. The question now was how to present that research in a way that respected both Thomas's needs and the historical truth of Anna and Rose's relationship. Margaret prepared a comprehensive document detailing her restoration process, her discovery of the deliberate damage, and her subsequent research into the obscured figure's identity. She included copies of all relevant documentary evidence, including the letters Thomas had discovered, the business association records showing Anna and Rose's professional connections, and the various photographs documenting their relationship over time. She organized the material to present the evidence objectively, allowing Thomas to draw his own conclusions about the nature and significance of Anna and Rose's relationship rather than imposing her own interpretation. However, she also included contextual information about same-sex relationships in early 20th century America, the social and legal consequences such relationships faced, and the strategies people employed to maintain relationships while minimizing the risk of social, professional, or legal destruction. When Margaret met with Thomas in late January, she presented both versions of the restored photograph along with the comprehensive documentation. She explained that the choice between versions was ultimately his to make, that as Anna's descendant and the current keeper of family history, he had the right and responsibility to decide how much of this hidden truth to reveal and to whom. However, she also argued that Eleanor's decision to preserve the letters and photographs, her final insistence that someone needed to see Anna clearly and that the truth was in her eyes, suggested a desire for this history to eventually be known and understood. Margaret pointed out that the photograph with Rose restored showed both women as they had chosen to appear together, that respecting their original decision meant presenting the unaltered image even if subsequent damage had hidden Rose's presence. Thomas listened carefully to Margaret's presentation, examining both versions of the photograph multiple times, clearly wrestling with competing obligations to historical accuracy, family memory, and his own understanding of how to honor his great-grandmother's legacy. He spoke about his conservative upbringing, about family members who would be shocked or disturbed by revelations about Anna's relationship with Rose, about his concern that presenting this hidden history might generate controversy that would overshadow Anna's genuine accomplishments as a businesswoman and immigrant success story. Yet he also acknowledged that hiding Rose's existence seemed like a betrayal, an ongoing participation in the erasure that had denied both women the right to have their relationship acknowledged even after death had removed any possibility of social or legal consequences. The conversation broadened beyond the specific question of which photograph version to display, touching on larger questions about historical truth, family narratives, and the ethics of revealing secrets that the original participants had carefully guarded. Margaret argued that Anna and Rose had lived in an era when hiding their relationship was necessary for survival, when revelation would have meant professional ruin, social ostracism, and potential legal prosecution. However, they no longer lived in that era, and while contemporary society remained far from perfect in its treatment of non-normative relationships, the specific dangers Anna and Rose had faced no longer existed with the same intensity. Presenting their story now could serve as testimony to the courage required to maintain authentic relationships in hostile circumstances, honoring both women's determination to find happiness despite overwhelming social constraints. Thomas asked Margaret about the ring Rose wore in both photographs, wondering whether it might still exist somewhere in the family's possession. Margaret explained the claddagh ring's traditional significance, how it symbolized love and loyalty in Irish culture, and how Rose wearing such a ring suggested Anna had given it to her as a token of commitment. Thomas recalled that his grandmother Eleanor had owned an unusual old ring that she had always worn but never discussed, a ring that had disappeared from her effects before he began sorting them, possibly taken by another family member or perhaps lost during her final illness. Margaret suggested that if the ring could be located and matched to the photographs, it would provide additional tangible evidence of Anna and Rose's relationship, though she acknowledged that such evidence might not be necessary given the substantial documentation they had already compiled. As their discussion continued, Thomas gradually moved toward accepting Margaret's recommendation to use the reconstructed photograph showing both women. He recognized that his own initial discomfort reflected generations of social conditioning rather than any objective assessment of Anna's character or choices. Anna had been a remarkable woman who had built a successful business through her own efforts, maintained her integrity and reputation in a challenging environment, and navigated social constraints that would have destroyed someone with less determination and intelligence. The fact that she had also maintained a meaningful relationship with Rose, despite all the obstacles such a relationship faced in 1920 Seattle, testified to her courage rather than diminishing her accomplishments. Thomas decided that he would display the reconstructed photograph in his home, that he would share the documentation with family members who were interested in knowing the complete history, and that he would make the letters and other materials available to historical archives that documented LGBTQ history in the Pacific Northwest. Margaret's professional role in the Hannon family's story concluded with the delivery of both photograph versions and the comprehensive documentation package. However, the investigation had affected her profoundly in ways that extended beyond professional satisfaction at a complex restoration successfully completed. She had spent months immersed in Anna and Rose's world, understanding their constraints, appreciating their courage, and mourning their separation. The research had prompted Margaret to reflect on her own life's trajectory, on choices she had made and opportunities she had pursued, on the relative freedom she enjoyed compared to the women whose story she had uncovered. She felt privileged to have been the person who had restored Anna and Rose's photograph, who had seen the truth in Anna's eyes that Eleanor had wanted revealed, who had given voice to a silenced history. The broader implications of the Hannon investigation began to emerge in the following months as Margaret's documentation circulated among historical researchers and LGBTQ historians. Several scholars contacted her, interested in using the materials to illuminate the lives of same-sex couples in early 20th century America, particularly immigrant women who had faced multiple layers of marginalization and constraint. Margaret's research methodology, combining traditional photograph restoration with extensive historical investigation, attracted professional attention as a model for how material culture analysis could reveal hidden histories that written records alone might miss. She was invited to present her findings at a digital humanities conference, where her work resonated with other researchers exploring how technology could help uncover suppressed or concealed historical narratives. The Hannon case also prompted Margaret to reconsider her approach to photograph restoration more broadly. She began paying closer attention to signs of deliberate damage or alteration in the materials clients brought her, recognizing that such interventions often signaled hidden stories worth investigating. While she maintained clear professional boundaries about how extensively she would research individual projects, she developed protocols for documenting evidence of intentional concealment and providing clients with resources for further investigation if they chose to pursue family mysteries. Margaret realized that her technical skills in restoring photographs carried ethical responsibilities regarding what those photographs revealed, that she had obligations not just to clients who commissioned restorations but to the people depicted in the photographs themselves, whose stories deserved to be told accurately and completely. In March, Thomas contacted Margaret with news that both pleased and saddened her. He had located the ring Rose had worn in the photographs, discovering it among possessions of his aunt who had inherited it after Eleanor's death. The aunt, Thomas's mother's sister who was in her mid-80s, had remembered Eleanor telling her that the ring had belonged to Anna, that it held special significance, though Eleanor had never explained why. When Thomas showed his aunt the photographs and shared what Margaret had discovered about Anna and Rose's relationship, she had been quiet for several minutes before acknowledging that she had always suspected something about Anna's history remained untold. She had occasionally heard fragments of conversation among older family members, references to Anna's friend who had disappeared, questions about whether Anna had married by choice or obligation, but the full story had remained obscure until now. The aunt agreed to loan the ring to the Museum of History and Industry, where it could be displayed alongside the restored photograph and selected letters as part of an exhibit on Seattle's LGBTQ history in the early 20th century. Thomas worked with museum curators to develop an exhibition that contextualized Anna and Rose's relationship within the broader social history of the period, showing how they had navigated the constraints of their era while maintaining their connection as long as circumstances permitted. The exhibit included the reconstructed photographs showing both women, samples of Rose's letters, business records documenting their professional association, and the clado ring that had symbolized their commitment to each other. The exhibit attracted significant local attention when it opened in June, with several news articles praising the museum for illuminating an often hidden aspect of Seattle's past. Margaret attended the exhibit's opening with James and Sophie, experiencing complex emotions as she viewed the materials she had spent months researching now displayed for public education. She felt pride in having contributed to recovering and presenting this history, satisfaction that Anna and Rose's story could finally be told with accuracy and respect rather than silence or distortion. However, she also felt the weight of knowing that this outcome had only been possible because all the people who had lived through the actual events were now deceased, that Anna and Rose themselves had never experienced the freedom to have their relationship acknowledged publicly. Margaret wondered what Anna might have thought about this exhibit, whether she would have welcomed the revelation or felt her privacy violated, whether she would have believed the social progress that made such an exhibit possible justified exposing secrets she had carefully guarded throughout her life. The exhibit led to several unexpected developments that extended Anna and Rose's story beyond what Margaret had initially uncovered. A woman named Patricia Romano contacted the museum after reading about the exhibit, explaining that she was Rose Martinelli's great-niece, descended from Rose's brother who had remained in Italy. Patricia had grown up hearing family stories about her great-aunt who had emigrated to America and achieved business success before her early death, but the family narrative had always portrayed Rose as a woman who had sacrificed personal happiness for professional achievement, who had never married because she was too independent and career-focused for the era's expectations. Patricia had brought with her several letters Rose had sent to her brother in Italy during her Seattle years, letters that paralleled those Anna had preserved but written in Italian and therefore revealing even more explicitly the emotional depth of Rose's relationship with Anna. Patricia's letters included one written shortly after Rose's arrival in San Francisco, describing her grief at leaving Seattle and the woman she loved, her anger at a society that forced such separations, and her determination to build a successful life nonetheless as a form of defiance against the circumstances that had destroyed her relationship. Rose had written about contemplating suicide during her first months in San Francisco, feeling that life without Anna held no meaning, but ultimately deciding that surviving and succeeding would be the best revenge against the social forces that had separated them. Later letters described Rose's attempts to build new relationships, her involvement in San Francisco's Italian community, and her gradual acceptance that she would never again experience the connection she had shared with Anna. The final letter in Patricia's collection, written shortly before Rose's death in 1947, expressed hope that she would soon be reunited with Anna, revealing that Rose did not know Anna had remarried and was still living, that they had maintained no contact for nearly 20 years. This revelation prompted Margaret to re-examine Anna's later correspondence that Thomas had preserved. She discovered several letters Anna had written to various friends in the late 1940s and early 1950s, including references to learning about Rose's death through a mutual acquaintance who had maintained connections in San Francisco's Italian community. Anna's letters revealed her devastation at the news, her grief complicated by the awareness that Rose had died alone and struggling financially while Anna had achieved the security of marriage and property ownership. Anna wrote about guilt that she had accepted conventional marriage while Rose had remained alone, about wondering whether she should have been braver, should have found some way to maintain their relationship despite the social costs. These letters suggested that Anna's marriage to William Hannon, while providing security and social legitimacy, had not erased her feelings for Rose or her regret at how their relationship had ended. The expanded narrative that emerged from combining Anna's preserved letters with Patricia's collection from Rose provided a more complete picture of both women's lives and the long-term impact of their forced separation. Museum curators updated the exhibit to include this additional material, creating a more nuanced presentation that showed not just the relationship's peak during their Seattle years but also the aftermath both women navigated for the remainder of their lives. The updated exhibit attracted academic attention from researchers studying long-term psychological impacts of relationship disruption caused by social discrimination, the ways enforced closeting affected life outcomes, and the resilient strategies people employed to survive and sometimes thrive despite losing relationships that had been central to their identity and happiness. For Margaret, the expanding scope of Anna and Rose's story reinforced her belief that Eleanor had been right to preserve the evidence and push for the truth to be revealed. The documentation had allowed both women's full humanity to be recognized, their relationship acknowledged as significant rather than erased as shameful or threatening. Margaret reflected on how different Anna and Rose's lives might have been if they had lived in an era that allowed their relationship to exist openly, how much emotional energy they had expended maintaining necessary deceptions, how much happiness had been lost to fear of discovery and social consequences. She recognized that contemporary same-sex couples still faced challenges and discrimination, but the ability to have relationships legally recognized and socially acknowledged represented a fundamental shift from the secrecy Anna and Rose had been forced to maintain. The Hannon photograph restoration had taken Margaret far beyond her original professional mandate, transforming what should have been a straightforward technical project into a months-long historical investigation that uncovered a hidden relationship and ultimately contributed to public understanding of LGBTQ history in the Pacific Northwest. Margaret's experience prompted her to develop workshops on ethical considerations in photograph restoration, teaching other professionals to recognize signs of deliberate alteration or concealment and to understand their obligations when such evidence appeared. She argued that photograph restorers had responsibilities not just to preserve and repair physical artifacts, but to consider what those artifacts revealed about the lives depicted, to approach their work with awareness that photographs often served as sites of contested memory where family narratives included and excluded people based on social acceptability rather than actual importance. In September, nearly a year after she had first received the damaged Hannon photograph, Margaret was invited to speak at a symposium on material culture and LGBTQ history at the University of Washington. She presented a comprehensive account of her restoration process, her investigative methodology, and the historical context she had uncovered about Anna and Rose's relationship. The presentation included images of the damaged photograph, the step-by-step restoration process, the reconstructed final image showing both women, and samples of the correspondence that had documented their relationship. Margaret discussed the ethical considerations she had navigated throughout the project, the balance between respecting client privacy and revealing important historical truths, and the ways technical photograph restoration skills could be combined with historical research to illuminate hidden aspects of the past. The symposium audience included several elderly women who approached Margaret after her presentation, sharing their own stories of relationships that had existed in secrecy during various periods of the 20th century. One woman, now in her 80s, described maintaining a relationship with another woman for over 40 years while both remained officially single, living in separate apartments in the same building, presenting themselves to the world as elderly spinster friends while privately sharing a life partnership that had sustained them through decades of necessary concealment. She told Margaret that seeing Anna and Rose's story publicly presented, their relationship acknowledged and honored rather than hidden or pathologized, had given her permission to finally tell her own story to younger family members who had never understood why she and her companion had been so important to each other. These conversations reinforced for Margaret the significance of the work she had inadvertently undertaken when she accepted the Hannon photograph restoration. By revealing Anna and Rose's hidden relationship, by insisting that both women deserved to be visible in the family photograph that documented Anna's achievements, Margaret had contributed to a larger process of historical recovery that gave voice to experiences systematically excluded from conventional historical narratives. She recognized that her work represented a small piece of a much larger effort by historians, activists, and community members to document LGBTQ lives and relationships that had been deliberately obscured, forgotten, or destroyed by people determined to enforce heteronormative historical narratives. The Hannon Project had demonstrated how material culture analysis, when combined with thorough archival research and ethical commitment to revealing hidden truths, could help recover these erased histories. The final chapter of Margaret's involvement with the Hannon story came in early November, when Thomas invited her to a small private ceremony at his home. He had commissioned a local artist to create a memorial plaque that would be installed at the location where Anna's boarding house had once stood, now a modern apartment building in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. The plaque would identify the site as the location where Anna Hannon had operated a successful boarding house from 1922 through 1938, noting her contributions to Seattle's Irish immigrant community and her role in providing stable housing for working women during the challenging years of the Depression. More significantly, the plaque would also acknowledge Rose Martinelli, describing her as Anna's dear friend and business associate, a deliberate phrasing that Thomas had chosen to respect both historical accuracy and contemporary understanding while avoiding language that might provoke vandalism or controversy. The ceremony, which included several historians who had used the Anna and Rose materials in their research, Thomas spoke about the importance of preserving complete family histories, rather than sanitized versions that excluded uncomfortable truths. He acknowledged his initial discomfort with the revelations about Anna's relationship with Rose, his struggle to reconcile the hidden history with the conventional narrative he had grown up believing. However, he explained that learning the full truth had ultimately deepened his respect for Anna, whose courage in maintaining her authentic self despite overwhelming social pressure exemplified the best qualities of immigrant resilience and determination. Thomas thanked Margaret for her role in recovering this history, acknowledging that without her persistent investigation and her ethical commitment to revealing what she had discovered, Anna and Rose's story would have remained hidden. The damaged photograph's secret preserved by ongoing silence. Margaret's response to Thomas's thanks was brief but heartfelt. She explained that she had only done what Eleanor Hannon had been trying to arrange through her confused final insistence that someone needed to see Anna clearly, that the truth was in her eyes. Margaret had seen that truth in Anna's gaze once the photograph was properly restored, had recognized in her expression the determination of someone maintaining necessary secrets while silently insisting on the validity of her concealed life. By following Eleanor's guidance to look closely at Anna's eyes, Margaret had found not just a hidden companion but a hidden history that deserved acknowledgement and respect. She concluded by saying that she felt privileged to have been the person who had uncovered and revealed this story, that doing so had been one of the most meaningful experiences of her professional career. As Margaret stood before the newly installed plaque on a cold November afternoon, reading the words that acknowledged both Anna and Rose's existence and relationship, she thought about the long journey from that first damaged photograph to this public memorial. The restoration had taken her far beyond technical photographic repair into questions of historical ethics, family memory, and the responsibilities of those who held power over how the past was preserved and presented. Margaret had learned that photograph restoration was never merely a technical process but always an act of historical interpretation, that decisions about what to preserve, reveal, or conceal had implications extending far beyond individual family memories to broader questions of whose stories were deemed worthy of remembrance and whose were condemned to silence. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally began as the small group dispersed, leaving Margaret standing alone before the. She thought about Anna and Rose, about the photograph that had documented them together before fear and social pressure had demanded Rose's erasure, about the letters that had preserved their voices after death had silenced them, about Eleanor's determination that eventually someone would see the truth her grandmother had hidden for so long. Margaret understood that she had been part of a chain of women extending across a century, each making choices about what to reveal and what to conceal, what to preserve and what to destroy, each decision shaped by the social possibilities and constraints of her particular moment. By choosing to reveal rather than continue the concealment, Margaret had helped break that century-long silence, giving Anna and Rose the acknowledgement they had been denied in life but could finally receive in death. As Margaret walked back to her car through the strengthening rain, she carried with her the reconstructed photograph she had brought to the ceremony. The image showing both women as they had originally appeared before someone had damaged the photograph to hide Rose's presence. In the digital file, Anna and Rose stood together before the Victorian boarding house that represented Anna's achievement, their shoulders nearly touching, Rose's hand resting on Anna's shoulder in a gesture of support and connection, both women looking directly at the camera with expressions that revealed strength, determination, and a defiant insistence on their right to stand together despite a world that would have preferred them separated. Margaret had restored not just a photograph but a relationship, had made visible what had been deliberately obscured, had fulfilled Eleanor's final wish that someone would see Anna clearly and recognize the truth in her eyes, that she had loved and been loved, that she had built a life that mattered, that she deserved to be remembered completely and honestly rather than through sanitized narratives that honored only socially acceptable achievements while hiding the most meaningful aspects of her experience. The Hannon photograph restoration had taught Margaret that every damaged photograph potentially held secrets, that deliberate alterations often signaled hidden stories worth recovering, that her technical skills carried ethical obligations extending beyond client service to historical accuracy and human dignity. She had learned that seeing clearly, truly seeing what photographs revealed about the lives they documented, required more than optical precision or technical expertise. It required empathy, persistence, historical imagination, and willingness to challenge comfortable narratives in service of uncomfortable truths. Anna Hannon's gaze, restored to clarity after decades of concealment and neglect, had looked out at Margaret across nearly a century of separation, silently insisting on recognition, acknowledgement, and the right to have her complete story told. Margaret had honored that silent demand, and in doing so had discovered that photograph restoration, properly understood, was always an act of bearing witness to lives that deserve to be seen, remembered, and honored in their full complexity and truth. To uncover more stories that reveal the hidden secrets and forgotten mysteries of the past, leave a like if this deep investigation kept you hooked until the end. I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Did you know that 80% of people who watch aren't subscribed and end up missing incredible stories? It costs nothing. Oh, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and share other dark tales that, in your opinion, deserve to be explored here on the channel. See you soon.